Welcome to the presentation on the stages of the assessment cycle. Now that we have learned about how to create student learning or development objectives, we can discuss how to map programming, interventions, or curricula to our objectives. Mapping our programming to our student learning or development objectives is a key stage in the assessment cycle because it allows us to identify potential gaps in content coverage, and it can help us gauge the extent to which each objective is covered across our programming. We are glad that you have joined us to learn more about this important stage in the assessment cycle. Let's begin. First, we want to think about where mapping objectives to our programming fits into the assessment cycle. As shown here with the gold star, we can see that creating and mapping programming to our student learning objectives comes immediately after we create our objectives. Note that you may be in the process of creating new programming, interventions, or curriculum. If that is the case, you can map your objectives to potential programming that you are creating. This can be very useful for ensuring program alignment and helping to organize program creation around your student learning objectives. On the other hand, you may already have existing programming in place. In this case, mapping your objectives to your current program has many benefits. It can help you identify gaps or areas in which you do not have programming in place. It can also help you gauge the amount of coverage that each objective has within your programming. For instance, you may have one objective that is covered in 5 different aspects of your program, whereas another objective may only be covered in one aspect of the program. The takeaway is that mapping your objectives to your programming is very useful whether you are creating new programming or you already have existing programming in place. We will see an example program objective mapping shortly. Let's continue on. Now that we understand where mapping your objectives to your program fits into the assessment process and why it is important, let's talk more about the purpose of creating this mapping. First, creating a mapping of your objectives to your program ensures that your programming is actually covering every objective. Second, when you map your objectives to your programming, you can see exactly where and how your objectives are reinforced within your program. In addition, you can share this mapping with other colleagues and external stakeholders to help them understand exactly what occurs in your programming and how your programming is expected to impact student learning or development. Let's look at an example chart that demonstrates how to map objectives to programming. This example comes from a Graduate Assistant Orientation Training Programming known as the Graduate Assistant Institute, or the GAI. The GAI provides training and assessment practice for graduate assistants that work in the Center for Assessment and Research Studies, or CARS. In each row of the chart, highlighted by the gold boxes, we can see different GAI sessions or presentations. We can see that the first session of the first day of the GAI is Introduction to the GAI. The first thing that we should notice is that this particular session or this particular aspect of our programming is not mapped to any of our objectives. This may be cause for concern because if this first session is not aligned with any of our objectives, it most likely is not helping students achieve the things we want them to know, think, or do as a result of our programming. Clearly, mapping objectives to program curriculum can help us identify gaps in which our programming is not aligned with our objectives. Let's look at another example. The third session on day 1 is Intro to the Learning and Assessment Cycle. We can see from the mapping chart that this particular session or this particular aspect of our programming maps to Objective 3, identify the basic components of the learning and assessment cycle, and Objective 4, articulate the purpose of assessment. Now let's look at each column in the chart. Each column contains a different objective for our program or intervention. For example, we can see that the gold box is highlighting Objective 1. Looking at each column one at a time allows us to see precisely how many sessions or portions of our programming are aligned with each objective. For Objective 1, we can easily see that 2 different sessions include content that aligns with Objective 1, and those sessions are the Donna Welcome presentation and the CARS Roles and Responsibilities presentation. Finally, if we look at the bottom row in the mapping chart, we see that we have added together each column in the chart. This allows us to look at our entire mapped program in a more holistic way. That is, we can see that content aligned with Objective 3 is covered in only 1 session or presentation, whereas content aligned with Objective 7 is covered in 6 sessions or presentations. We encourage you to use this example mapping chart to create your own mapping of your objectives to your programming. You can also use the same technique to map your assessment instruments to your objectives. We hope that you have enjoyed learning about mapping your student learning or development objectives to your programming. Next, we will learn how to select or design instruments to measure your objectives, so stay tuned.